So as the new 2022 Subaru BRZ starts rolling off the assembly line and we are seeing more and more of them out in public and on YouTube, we can finally begin to start forming our opinions and what we think about this car. Now that it's already out, we've seen the performance numbers, we've seen what's under the hood, and we see how it drives. So let's start off with talking about the looks of the 2022 Subaru BRZ. Now this car, whenever it first came out, I was really skeptical of it because I did not think it looked that good. I thought it looked like something more like a Civic or a Camry than the first generation BRZ, which looked more like a serious sports car and a good contender on the racetrack. But of course, a year has passed since this car was first revealed, and now the looks are starting to grow on me just a little bit, and I think for most people that's the case. A year ago, I think this car did not look that good. I thought it just looked like a basic economy sedan, but now that I have seen it in videos, seen it in real life with my own eyes, this car actually looks pretty good. I think it's a good generational leap from the first BRZ to the second one. I think that the looks still capture what the BRZ is supposed to be about, which of course is handling on back roads and on the track, and a good driver-focused experience. I think that the outside of this car, now that it's grown on me a little bit, I've had time to sleep on it and think about how this car looks and the design of it. I think that it's really come along nicely, and in 2022, this looks like a very nice looking sports car. Now of course, I still do think that the front of the car, the front fender flares look way too smooth. The front grille doesn't look quite as aggressive as it could have been. I think that the rear fender arches could have been a bit more angular and aggressive. It could have had a bit more presence on the road. And the rear of the car, honestly, it's probably the worst part of the car, the taillights especially. They've grown on me a little bit. I think that the taillights are cool, but the overall design of the rear of the BRZ, I just do not think it looks that good. It looks more like a Camry or a Corolla instead of a BRZ, a serious backroad race car. So from an aesthetic and looks perspective of the 2022 BRZ, I think that the car actually under-delivered in this category. And before we get too far into this video, I would really appreciate it if you liked, subscribe, share this video. Let me know down in the comments below what you think of the 2022 BRZ. But diving into the interior, I think that this is a huge leap over the first generation of the BRZ. And for those of you who do not know this, I actually have a 2015 FRS, so I know the ins and outs of the first generation really well, and it's easier for me to compare it to the new generation of the BRZ. Going from the first generation, the interior of the first generation BRZ was not that great. It was very economy, very plasticky. Of course, the second generation is too. It's a cheap car, only around $27,000, but the first car just did not have much in the sense of comfort, much in the sense of passenger comfort especially. But in the new BRZ, they upgraded the infotainment system, they upgraded the gauge cluster, the car now has heated seats and a lot of different creature comforts. The AC heat and air is obviously a lot better than the previous generation. The interior of this car went above and beyond what I expected it would be, especially for a $27,000 car. It's actually very nice, like something you would get in a decent economy car such as a Camry, which I guess is fitting because of the looks on the outside. But on the interior, I would say that this car overperformed from what I actually expected it would look like. So now that we've got the looks of this car and the interior out of the way, let's actually dive into something that actually matters in examining this car. So as you all probably already guessed, this car also came with a Boxer flat 4 motor that was produced by Subaru, but instead of the 2-liter that was in the first generation BRZ, the second generation got a 2.4-liter FA24 motor, which produces between 40 and 50 more horsepower than the first generation. Now this is really nice because the motor in this car also got rid of the torque dip that was present in the first generation. For those of you who don't know, in the first generation between 3500 and 4500 RPMs, there was a massive torque dip in the dyno chart. I'll put a picture up there right now. But this was a huge problem whether you were just putting around town or you were trying to get up to speed on the highway. You'd have to get over that hump in order so you could get up to speed, so you could get up to 70. And that's a lot of the reason as to why the car's 0 to 60 time was so low, and a lot of critics had a lot to say about the speed of the first generation BRZ. But of course, by boring out the engine to a 2.4 liter flat 4, they were able to push not only more power, but more power is safer, especially with boost, and the torque dip is gone. There's a lot more low-end torque in this car, so it's a lot easier to drive around town, whether you're leaving off from a red light or even if you're on back roads and you're driving really hard. If you upshift a little too soon, it won't kill your momentum like the first generation car actually would. So in terms of engine, I think once again Subaru overperformed in this category, and there will always be people out there that think that this car should come from factory with a turbo, but that's not the philosophy behind this car. What we're about to get into next actually is. So for the engine, I give it, way above what the first generation BRZ had underneath the hood. So now let's go ahead and dive into the bread and butter of the 2022 Subaru BRZ, the handling, of course. And now the second generation BRZ is still rear wheel drive, still weighs around 2,800 pounds, which is a really light coupe, has the two kind of back seats in the car still, so it's technically a 4-seater. Comes in a 6-speed automatic, 6-speed manual. Of course, the manual is the one you want to opt for because the automatic in this car is still not great. But the handling of this car is really where it shines. A lot of the car's body panels have been replaced with aluminum body panels, which makes it a lot more rigid, and the handling is a lot better. And the suspension on the 2022 is also way further upgraded than the first generation was. The rigidity of this car is 50% more than the original, which means you can put down a lot more power, it'll handle it, and it'll have a lot more traction in and out of the corners. And like I mentioned just a second ago, the hood and the front fenders and the front of the car is actually made of aluminum, so the center of gravity of this car was actually able to be a lot lower because the engine was able to be set a lot lower in the car, which causes it to stick a lot better to the ground. And just like the first generation BRZ, this car is very playful. It likes to be thrown around a lot. You can drift it. You can also drive it on stickier tires and really stick to the ground. It really kept the characteristics of the driving feel of the first generation and just stiffened it up a lot, made it a lot more track worthy in the second generation. So now that is a lot less you'll have to upgrade in terms of suspension, especially if you want a bit more power out of this car with either a supercharger or a turbo. And finally, they fixed what was my biggest complaint with the first generation BRZ. They actually put summer tires on this one instead of the cheap Prius tires that were economy and meant for gas mileage, maximum gas mileage. On the first generation, they actually put on a serious summer tire onto this car, so straight out of the factory, it'll be a lot more fun to drive and a lot stickier on the road. So the second generation BRZ is still fun, very playful, very fun to drive on the road, to throw around, to drift. So I'd say it's on par with what I expected. It's a bit better, it's a good step up over the first generation BRZ, but it's nothing like super crazy, and that's not really what we expected. We expected it to slowly get better from the first generation to the second generation, and that's exactly what they did. They cleaned up the first generation, made it a lot more refined. Of course, there's still a lot that needs to be done, especially if they're going to make a third generation, but for this generation, I think it's on par with what most people expected, including myself. So to sum everything up, I would say that overall the 2022 Subaru BRZ is slightly above what I expected it would be. I do not think it underdelivered like some people do, and honestly a lot of people that think that just think that the car should have came with a turbo, but that's not what the car is about. The car stayed to its roots from the first generation BRZ, and it just refined it and kept building on top of it. I don't think it was crazy like blowing my mind like some YouTubers make it out to be, but I do think this is a really good car, and of course the first generation was already a really good car in my opinion, so it was just a step up. It was a bit higher than what I even expected, which is saying a lot. So overall, I think that this is a really good car, and it possibly over-delivered in a lot of aspects from what most people were even expecting. So those are just the thoughts of a first generation FRS owner about the second generation BRZ. And I don't even know if you guys even like playing car racing games, but the new Gran Turismo 7 was actually just announced. They had a huge trailer out. It's out on YouTube now. It's called the State of Play of Gran Turismo 7 that they released. And the game's supposed to come out on March 4th. I don't even know if y'all play Gran Turismo, but if y'all like to see me make a video about it, let me know down in the comments below. But if you like this video, check out the one that's on your screen right now. But for now, this is Scion Life signing out.